Hello everyone! We continue the journey to rank all Spider-Man video games with the help of my Stasicritic scoring system, the details of which can be found in the pinned comment. The era of games based on the first Amazing Spider-Man movie overall was a bit disappointing, though I can totally see how the main release could be enjoyed by people. Still, let's see if things have improved with the release of the Amazing Spider-Man 2 movie, shall we? The Amazing Spider-Man sequel developed by Beanox feels like it should absolutely be a recipe for improvement over the previous game. But sadly, I wouldn't say that's necessarily the case. The first game could be considered pretty shallow mechanically, but it hit that well with its cinematic nature, plus it had enough variety within its activities that one could feel excited playing through it. The sequel tries to add depth to the mechanics, but it does so only a little, while also forfeiting a lot of the more cinematic aspects with far less variety in the open-world activities. As a result, we have a game that's technically adequate, but barely has anything to master and is not really exciting to look at. The latter aspect is really not helped by the even weirder quality of the faces and their animation. Most characters in this game just look wrong. The game has implemented a physics-based web swinging system, and not only that, you have to press the right or left trigger to shoot the web from the respective hand. Sort of like how Spider-Man 3 for the Wii did it, but obviously without the flicking hand motions. It's more exciting in concept than it is in implementation though. Very often Spidey won't actually shoot at the side you're choosing, even if there are clearly attachable surfaces. Also, despite this being a seemingly physics-based system, there is a distinct lack of momentum, which is very visible in how Spider-Man sort of snaps into one of the two possible states after releasing a swing, going forward or going up. Plus, the web rush mode is still here, and that's the most efficient way to navigate anyway. Why bother swinging when you can just point to a location you want to be at? So even though technically there is more mechanical capabilities, the game didn't actually become more interesting. There's a bunch of weird additions too, like separately leveling up every suit you're wearing and the hero mana system, which I'm not against in principle, but its implementation is very annoying. The gist of it is that you're getting positive reputation points for handling random crimes and negative reputation points for not doing so. Sounds pretty Spider-Man-y, right? Well, yeah, but crimes can pop up on the opposite end of the city with no real way to reach them in time, as their active period is pretty short. So you can get a bunch of menace points just while trying to go and save some people. The balance is way off. Literally 5 minutes is enough to reach menace level 3. And the bigger your menace level, the more task force hunters around the city will try to get you, in addition to a penalty for your costume stats. And the reward for doing heroic actions? A buff to your costume abilities, and also an annoying news report after absolutely every completed random event. So this is a system that from a gameplay point of view is really easy to fail at, but the considerable effort to succeed is rewarded only with being less annoyed during free roam traversal. And again, I don't mind the whole hero menace metering concept, but you have to admit, what's in the Amazing Spider-Man 2 is really unappealing. The story starts intriguing enough with Peter trying to get some closure by finding Uncle Ben's killer, which then leads to a bigger conflict, but in reality just transforms into a huge mess of constantly appearing villains and little to no connectivity between the sequence of events. And the missions are okay. But it is sort of weird how if the first Amazing Spider-Man game was much more comic book-like than the movie it was based on, this one goes for the opposite approach. It actually is somewhat more grounded than the more comic book-like movie sequel. I'm saying somewhat because this game also features Carnage for reasons. But in general, the missions are not that exciting and there's far less variance. And considering that the gameplay systems are just adequate, the game doesn't really have much to offer. It will get a disappointing rating of 36. If you're really looking for an open-world Spider-Man fix, you might enjoy it. But I think it's better to find the first Amazing Spider-Man game instead. anyone from High Voltage Software is watching this video, I just want to make sure it's clear that all my criticisms pertain to the product in question and not the people who made it. Being a game developer myself, I know full well just how many things can go wrong during production, especially when it's a licensed title. With that said, this 3DS version of The Amazing Spider-Man 2 has got to be one of the most horrendous games I have ever played in my life. It is ugly, the controls are horribly unresponsive, the swinging minigame is awful, combat is abysmal, the XP bar also seems to be the special ability bar, it doesn't really make sense, but honestly I had big issues forcing myself to try and understand everything because this title is just... Okay, look, there have been quite a lot of Spider-Man games in this list that aren't rated quite highly. But, in the context of my scoring system, only games below 30 are considered various stages of bad. If it's above 30, it might be severely flawed and disappointing, but also these games usually have something going for them that might bring enjoyment to some people. The Amazing Spider-Man 2, on the other hand, doesn't even care that you were explicitly told you're looking for a person with blonde hair and sunglasses, as the person you find doesn't have neither blonde hair nor sunglasses. And that's the least of the game's problems. I know people like to give games like a 2004 Spider-Man 2 for PC a lot of shit, and look, that game is not great, but it does try to vary its pacing, have some creative levels, do something interesting within the context of its admittedly simplistic systems. The Amazing Spider-Man 2 for 3DS doesn't even try. Just so you would understand, the Amazing Spider-Man 1 for DS had randomly generated levels, and this game has preset levels, but they feel even more randomly generated than there, and the core gameplay mechanics are awful. I am assigning a Stasocritic rating of 5. Yes, you heard me right, 5. This game being functional is the only good thing I can say about it. I literally can't imagine anyone actually enjoying this. I myself had been in a perpetual state of shock while playing. The Amazing Spider-Man 2 for the 3DS has nothing going for it and should be avoided like a plague. Gameloft's Amazing Spider-Man 2 is a total improvement over its predecessor. If the first Amazing Spider-Man game sort of relied on the novelty of having an open-world Spider-Man title on phones, its sequel has polished up the combat and movement mechanics, there's far more variety in what you do, and Spider-Man's voice acting is much better. Incidentally, played by the same actor who would voice Peter Parker in the future PlayStation exclusive games.
Set up a gang fight on a busy street corner? Are you insane?
I'm sick of waiting around. Come on, a man's gotta eat, right?
Word of advice, Brock. Next time you need to make some quick cash, ambush somebody who doesn't have lives to save. Don't let me see you again.
Sure, Spider-Man. Whatever you say.
The way Amazing Spider-Man 2 is structured is pretty fitting for a mobile title. There is various random events across the city, completing a certain number of them unlocks an investigation event, which will lead you one step closer towards the boss of the chapter. Rinse and repeat, as you gain coins for which you can upgrade your character and gain new abilities, and some side missions and collectibles appear across New York with each episode as well. However, the other side of its mobile-centric design is microtransactions, and balancing was clearly done with those in mind. Sooner or later, you will encounter an event which you can't complete without a particular skill, and your choice then is to either pay up, which in our modern days is not possible due to the game being delisted from storefronts with all online functionality shuttered, or go away, potentially leaving the person in need lying under the weight of a car while you complete other events to grind for currency. Luckily, there's enough variance in these events, ranging from giving autographs to fans, to catching civilians falling off rooftops, and of course various combat encounters and car chases. They all are completed quickly enough that you won't have time to get bored. So again, all this still works from the perspective of this being a mobile title you open up from time to time, but the structure and the need to grind definitely affects the pacing of the narrative, which is actually not as bad as you'd expect. The Amazing Spider-Man 2 doesn't try to adapt the story of the movie. There is Green Goblin, but it's not Harry Osborn. There is Electro, but the guy doesn't have the whole subplot of being a fan of Spider-Man in the past and feeling betrayed. He's just pissed off because he was the result of unwanted collateral damage that Spider-Man at the very beginning didn't seem to notice. In fact, the narrative tells a pretty well-connected story about a gang war which is secretly manipulated by Oscorp with the purpose of pushing its tech to authorities. Perhaps it's not spectacular, but certainly engaging enough to become a bit irritated when you need to grind for more coins to be able to complete the next story event. The Amazing Spider-Man 2 is getting a Metacritic rating of 62. It's a well-built smartphone game with fun enough combat and a solid structure, but some of its mobile design sensibilities that target prolonging the experience can be a bit irksome. Still, it's definitely a nice Spider-Man game. I bet you're surprised that in 2014 there were still Java-based titles getting released. But it's true. This game of title, like the Amazing Spider-Man game before it, has tons of variations depending on the phone, but we're looking only at the fullest version. To be fair, I think in most cases the various variations are much more similar than previous Java games had. And one of the reasons is that the gameplay experience has been severely simplified. If Toxic City had a brawler system where you use the central phone button to initiate a combo and then directional buttons to continue it in various ways, and the Amazing Spider-Man after it advanced that system with more combos even though it became a bit less consistent to play, the Amazing Spider-Man 2 forgoes all that to just have the central punch button as the only one you will need to press all the time. Well, to be fair, there is also a specific dodge button that you should press when you see the spider sense going off, and that's all you do throughout the entire game. Punch and dodge, punch and dodge, punch and dodge. Except during a special level where you follow Electro through the subway. And look, the game looks great and there's definitely variety in the levels and how they're paced, but it just gets so boring. Toxic City may have lacked some depth, but that was balanced out by the amount of control you had over the character and how creative you could be with the combos. Here, even as new enemy types appear, there is no strategy involved. You just keep pressing the same button until you see spider sense, so you press another button once and then you keep punching. This game will get a Metacritic rating of 45. It's definitely not a bad title, but I didn't have fun playing it. Felt like it was just pushing the same button over and over again, which, well, most of the time I was. Spider-Man Unlimited by Gameloft is a runner that nowadays is sadly closed and can't be played properly. Well, technically you can still play the tutorial section of the game up to the point where you need to rank a character up and call upon the game's online functions. And also apparently there is a way to fully play a version of the game from the middle of its lifespan with all the collection and ranking up functionality, but I've seen the steps for it and also how it would constantly be required to go between offline and online modes. There are just so many hoops that I can't call Spider-Man Unlimited a preserved title. It's a shame because the game is a pretty damn good runner. The controls are tight, there's quite a lot of variety in actions you have to do and how levels are generated, plus of course the collectible nature of getting all Spider-Man is quite appealing. For what it's worth, 4.5 years is a pretty solid lifespan for a live licensed mobile title, even though the game's plotline apparently wasn't concluded before closure. I wish the game wouldn't have been as centered on gating so much of the progression through online checks, as then we would still be able to properly enjoy the title. Anyway, I'm not rating games that are impossible to play now, so as fun as the game was back in the day, what I want to say now is rest in peace, Spider-Man Unlimited. You definitely didn't deserve to be suddenly closed. If you're in for some fully playable Spider-Man runner fix, Gameloft actually made a 2D Java-based runner. Spiritually, it's very similar to Unlimited, though of course there is a bit less variety and no ability to utilize 3D space in effective cinematic ways. But it's a fun runner. Tight controls, varied goals, solid progression. There are 3 worlds, so to speak, each focuses on a particular villain: Green Goblin, Sandman and Venom. But also as you complete a world, you unlock a more difficult version of it. So the replayability factor is quite high if this type of game is something you like. As fun as the game is, there is not much to discuss. What you see on the screen is what you get. And you get a game with a Sasocritic rating of 72. A very solid runner with enough levels, variety and unlockable Spider-Man characters to last for quite some time, though of course not as long as Unlimited. Spider-Man definitely did well on mobile platforms of this era. But let's be fair, phone games are very often unjustifiably ignored. Even on this type of rankings, you are unlikely to find any mobile titles. So it makes sense why, with the amazing Spider-Man 2 console and handheld games being a disappointment, which for the 3DS one is a compliment I guess, the franchise wouldn't see any Spider-Man games for quite a while. The character would still be present in titles with larger rosters of course, but no games of his own, even based on Spider-Man Marvel Cinematic Universe appearances, except some short promotional VR experiences. But 4 years later, Spider-Man video games would see a second rebirth after a prolonged hiatus.
Excuse me, late for work!